daily allegory through astrological divination. Today's story is a message intended as prophecy for the daughters of the old gods, the gods of the stars, the followers of the old way. So stay tuned into the end, because this message is specifically for those of the scythe, those of the snake, the butterfly, the star, and the blossom. We're going to end this with an affirmation invocation that's going to solidify the unsealing of the seventh seal of prophecy and liberate those who have been chained to something that doesn't provide benefit to their highest good. The story is about a ruthless young woman who tries to expand her family's occult network by targeting a mysterious man rumored to carry the star blood genetic of the Anunnaki. Using their signature slow dagger or zersetzung campaign of isolation, psychological warfare, and social sabotage meant to push victims into self-sabotage while racing against a demonic contract she believes binds her to the Leviathan. What she doesn't understand is that the man walks the full light and dark spectrum and is not only immortal but ancestrally entwined with the very power she invokes. The Lilith-devoted Scythes unknowingly assault their own maternal bloodline. The Medusa-following snakes strike at his soul guardian. The Hecate shadowing butterflies target their ancestral grandmother's heir. And the Ishtar-aligned stars realize too late he is her direct descendant, making every attack collapse in failure and backlash. As illusions cast by opportunistic Satanists fracture the sisterhood he was destined to unite, the true twist arrives when the women recognize the deception, reunite across factions, and stand with the rogue descendant carrying Lilith's spirit, turning their collective power against the predatory practitioners who tried to poison and curse their lineage for an age, ending the cycle and resetting the old ways. Today's story is the Red Vacuum. B learned early that power wasn't something you earned. It was something you took, then convinced everyone you deserved. Her family's network called itself a lineage of keepers, but it operated like a machine. Identify a target, isolate them, distort reality around them, and wait for the slow dagger to do its work. Careers ruined, friendships poisoned, institutions nudged into concern. A person cornered into disappearance, incarcerated, institutionalized, or erased while the family smiled and called it fate. This time the target wasn't just a man. He was an anomaly. I'm using my name for this story too, just couldn't think of a better name. His name was Todd, and the first time B saw him, she felt it in her teeth. A low electric pressure like a storm behind glass. Mars and Leo burned in his presence, unapologetic, impossible to shrink. The moment he walked into a room, the room rearranged. People made space without even realizing why. Eyes flickered towards him the way iron filings obey a magnet. B thought it was ego. She didn't understand that it was signal. She was on a deadline, though. A contract she'd sealed in blood, signed more with fear than devotion itself. Ticked like the metronome behind her thoughts, she called it a pact with Leviathan, king of hell. Because the name made her feel protected. In truth, it made her feel owned. The contract didn't ask for belief. It demanded and asked for results. Expansion, submission, new territory, a new crown placed on her family's occult empire. So she launched the method. Not an attack you could film, not a curse you could point to, just a careful rerouting of life, if you will, a redirection. A rumor placed like a seed, a friend nudged into distrust, a workplace complaint timed to look organic. B understood the brain the way a predator understands a nervous system. Apply pressure, wait for the neural loops to form, and the target begins policing themselves. It's a neural process of learned helplessness reinforced with just enough chaos to make the mind crave any explanation, even a false one. And above it all, the sky ran its own math. With Mars squared Saturn in the 7th, conflict hardened into contracts. Enemies bound together whether they wanted it or not. With the Mars square Neptune in the 9th, illusion blurred into ideology. People mistook fantasy for faith. Under the Pisces stellium of North Node Saturn and Neptune, entire groups drifted into trance like certainty, loyal to stories that they couldn't even prove. And B, fueled by the Sagittarius stellium of Sun, Venus, Mercury, spoke those stories like arrows dipped in honey, charming, righteous, persuasive. She didn't just lie, she narrated. Her coven's practice was narrow-rooted in one tradition, one toolkit, so she recruited outside help, 4 sister factions with aesthetic names and sharp appetites. The Scythes, who wore Lilith's devotion like a blade. The Snakes, who claimed Medusa's gaze as their inheritance. The Butterflies, who whispered Hecate at the crossroads and called it liberation. And the Stars, who prayed to Ishtar through glittering rites and social influence disguised as destiny. Bee gathered them like pieces on a board. In her mind, every person was either true or false, a Boolean world where obedience was 1 and resistance was 0. If Todd broke, the system returned true, victory. If he didn't, she would force the output. But Todd didn't behave like a normal variable. He didn't even spiral. He didn't isolate the way her targets usually did. He watched. And the longer Bee pushed, the more she felt something unsettling. Her magic wasn't landing clearly, or cleanly at all. It arrived, but thin. Blunted, like a blade striking fog. That was twist 1. See, Todd wasn't protected in the usual sense. He was engineered, not by Bee's enemies, not by priests or angels or warding circles, by something stranger. An inherited command of probability. He walked the border between light and dark spectrum as if both were his native air. Where Bee used ritual to bend perception, Todd used perception to bend reality. When the first volley hit, crafted through fear, group intention, bloodbound promises, Todd stepped into stillness and did something no one in Bee's world even had a language for. The air around him seemed dim, not with darkness, but with absence. A quiet zone. A photon-thin hush. The sensation of a room where the universe held its breath. He wasn't blocking the attack like one would think. He was starving it. Like cutting oxygen from fire, he reduced the energetic light the working needed to maintain coherence, and the spell degraded into static. Bee felt it as nausea, like trying to grip water. Then came twist 2. What didn't reach him didn't vanish. It pulled. Todd's field gathered the incoming force into a cold mathematical stillness, what he privately called and referred to as the quantum vacuum. A place where noise collapses into potential. He didn't return it as revenge. He returned it as correction, amplified not by rage, but by the horrifying elegance of physics. He treated their malice like probability amplitude. If they insisted on sending harm, then harm would return as consequence, scaled by the certainty of their very own intent. Imagine that logic applied to magic. It's not common, I would assume. Bee's coven began experiencing bad luck at first, little fractures. Ritual candle that wouldn't light, a phone that glitched at the wrong moment, a sudden fight between allies who had never fought before. Then those fractures widened into a pattern so consistent that it felt almost intelligent. Leaked secrets, exposed betrayals, reputations collapsing at precisely timed intervals like a metronome. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The covens called it a haunting. Bee called it sabotage. Neither was correct. It was entanglement. And it grew worse when Bee made the mistake of calling on deities directly to finish him. Lilith, Medusa, Hecate, Ishtar, Baron Samedi, Papa Legba, for example. She invoked them the way a desperate person uses a weapon that they don't even understand, gripping the blade by the wrong end, cutting herself, ultimately. She assumed the names belonged to her because she could speak them. That was twist 3. They weren't her allies, they were his blood. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. In the deep architecture of his lineage, the beings Bee summoned were ancestral forces anchored to him like guardians to a heart. The Scythes screamed Lilith's name as they struck, not realizing they were calling the maternal root of the very man they meant to break. The Snakes tried to turn Medusa against him, only to learn Medusa wasn't his enemy. She was a soul warden whose protection looked like a terror to the unworthy. The Butterflies chanted Hecate at the crossroads, and the crossroads answered, but not with permission, with judgment. The stars reached for Ishtar and finally felt it, the cold ancestral recognition that made their knees go weak. Every summoning snapped back like a severed cord. B began losing people, not to death, but to truth. Coven members woke from a trance, their certainty evaporated. Under Neptune's dissolving influence, illusions bled out like dye in water. Under Saturn's weight, consequence became unavoidable. And still B pushed, because Leviathan's contract did not care about her fear. It only cared about the outcome. So she reached for blood magic once again, not as a technique, but as an escalation. The idea that something must be sacrificed to force the world to comply. She convinced herself the sacrifice would be Todd. Instead, she sacrificed herself, not her life, but her story. The lie she'd lived by, I control the board, collapsed when she realized Todd wasn't playing on a board at all. He was playing on timelines. That was twist 4, and it broke her. Todd's retaliation didn't move through linear cause and effect. He didn't aim at a present. He aimed at her possibilities. He used the return like a string pulled tightly through reality, snapping to the version of B where her network failed, where her allies confessed, where her contracts soared, where her empire never stabilized. He bypassed the comfortable lie of one path forward and struck the branching options themselves, compressing her future into a narrow corridor where truth was the only exit and only absolute. The Covens panicked. Satanists, illusion casters, who had been manipulating the daughters of the old way for personal gain, tried to spin the chaos into renewed loyalty. They promised power, safety, hierarchy. They called B chosen. They thought she was chosen. But the sky cleared. Not literally, psychologically. The spell of narrative broke. The daughters of the old way, the scythes, the snakes, the butterflies, stars, blossoms, looked at each other and realized the same terrible thing at once. They had been weaponized and used. Fed lies and pointed at a man who should have been their bridge, not their enemy. The Boolean world of true over false, obedience over resistance, finally revealed its trap. It was never about spirituality. It was about control. And then Kali came in. The man, understanding the lower 6 arms of the 10-armed Kali, not just the 4, using the lower 2 to conjure up her, not as a monster, not as gore, but as palingenesis, destruction as rebirth, the end of a poison cycle so something clean can live. The red wavelength threaded through the woman's awakening like a pulse, not violence, but life force reclaimed. Rage transmuted into clarity, shame into resolve, fear into movement. They didn't obliterate anyone, they dissolved the structure. They refused the contract economy. They stopped feeding the machine, and they withdrew their belief, their labor, their bodies, and their names. The practitioners who preyed on them, those who had almost cursed their lineage for an eon, found themselves starving the very vacuum they tried to weaponize. Their influence vanished, power leaked away, the old way returned, not as domination, but as guardianship. And B finally understood what Leviathan actually was. Not a savior, not a king, but the hunger that grows when you build your identity on consuming others. The contract didn't end with fire. It ended with emptiness, because when her covens turned, when her illusions failed, when Todd's reality refused to bend, she had nothing left to bargain with but her own lies. Todd stood at the edge of it all, Mars and Leo, unbowed. Sagittarius fire, unwavering, and Pisces fate, inevitable, and did what B's world had never allowed. He offered the daughters a choice, not true or false, not obedience or punishment, a third state that was always the prerogative of the old way, freedom. And in that choice, the cycle ended. The red wavelength softened into dawn. The old gods, furious, ancient, and watchful, did not return to crown on empire. They returned to reclaim their daughters. And the man B tried to handle walked on untouched because he was never prey. He was the reset, a cosmic adjuster in human disguise. And we're going to end this with an invocation of the red vacuum and a sky clearing to reclaim our power and dissolve the illusions of deception for those who have used and deceived us. And we will reclaim our power and freedom under the red wavelength frequency that is the power of Mars. By the red wavelength, bloodlight of will, pulse of truth, ember of rebirth, I call the veil to thin and the false to fail. By the ancient star blood of the old gods and a hidden line that cannot be broken. By the names that return to the rightful heir, Lilith, Medusa, Hecate, Ishtar, I summon not attack but recognition. Let every misdirected blade remember its source. Let every borrowed power return to its lineage. I call the daughters of the old way, scythes, snakes, butterflies, stars, and blossoms, not as factions of confusion, but as one circle of clarity. Let the illusion casters and oath breakers be revealed. Let the hungry hands that used you be emptied. Let the contracts made in fear unravel at their seams. By the mechanics of the unseen, what is entangled cannot pretend it stands alone. What is observed must collapse into one absolute truth. What is sent in malice is gathered in the quantum vacuum and returned by probability's law, amplified by descender's certainty. Heir of the starline, walker of the light and dark spectrum, open the airspace. Where photons thin and magic loses its grip, let the hostile current be starved of fuel. Let the working degrade into noise. Let the timeline that favors corruption be cut away. Kali Ma, force of palingenesis, not for slaughter, but for ending what poisons the future. Destroy the cycle, birth the clean beginning. Turn rage to deliberation, fear into movement, shame into sovereignty once again, confusion into sight. And to Leviathan, name of drowning contracts and devouring bargains, your hunger is not law here. Your claim is measured, your chain is counted, your hold dissolves. So let the sky clear, let the daughters unite, let the predators lose the ground beneath their feet. Let the old way return, not as a cage, but as protection. By red light, by star blood, by collapse and rebirth. So it is spoken, so it is observed, so it becomes. And our affirmation for this, for retrieving our power, and embodying our freedom, and severing ties. In red light we remember our lineage. What is miscast collapses, and what is true is reborn. In the name of the Most High, I declare this law that underlies law, and so it is. I'll see you in the next one.